I'm Sarah Newbert, this is Steve, and this is Woven Upholstery Mending 101. I weave for a living, and for me, art making reminds me of my relationship to the earth. When I started weaving, it wasn't as much of a priority, but the more I researched materials and started to try to find sustainable, recycled, secondhand, repurposed materials, as well as learning how to minimize waste, the more it became a priority and the more that started to bleed into other areas of my life. So I learned how to mend. This is Steve. He's really the reason why we're here. I got a couch and it was a used one off of Craigslist, but it was in pretty good shape until this guy got a hold of it. Apparently, the upholstery was the perfect texture for his little claws, and within about a month, he and his sister Lola, who she's not as camera friendly as he is, they had torn some really big holes in the corners. And so I just decided to apply what I'd learned about using weaving to mend clothing to bigger piece. And for some reason, it went viral, and here we are. I think the fact that this has been so popular is really encouraging to me because it shows that culturally we're all feeling this desire to push back against the culture of disposability. And I think it means we're headed in a really exciting place. So I'm really happy that you're here. For this project, I've been repairing this super cute mid-century Broyhill chair. It was headed for the landfill. I just rescued it for free off of Craigslist. And actually, I was surprised that it made it as long as it did, because just about everywhere that I've repaired, the fabric was super threadbare, almost non-existent in some places. There were rips, there were staples sticking out. All the cracks were like stuffed with cracker crumbs. And it was just destined for the garbage, but I rescued it and it's got real good bones. And I'm guessing that since you're here, it means that you've got a favorite piece of furniture that may be a cat or a dog or a rabbit or a kid or a glass of wine has ruined and you want to give it some new life. And that's exactly what we're going to do. I think mending is my favorite sustainability practice. It's good for the earth. It's good for me financially because it's cheaper to fix things than it is to replace them. But it's also good for my soul. I find weaving to be really beautiful, but also a mindful and a spiritual practice. And it's a way to reframe our ideas about the things we own. And it also helps us bring more soul into our space. And I'm going to talk about that more, but for now, let's jump into learning. Let's talk about the supplies that you'll need for this project. You'll need some really sturdy warp yarn. This is a linen yarn, but cotton or hemp works just as well. You just want something that's really strong and doesn't stretch. You'll also need a little tape measure, a curved upholstery needle, a long wooden weaving needle, and then you'll need something to mark your upholstery. If you have dark upholstery, I would recommend a white chalk quilter's pencil. If you have lighter upholstery, I'm using a disappearing ink fabric pen in a dark purple. And then you're also going to need some scissors. I have a kit that's available to purchase that includes all of these items, and that's at sarahnewbert.com. You can also find all of these things at your local craft store or on Etsy. Let's also talk about weaving yarns. I'm using materials from Naroma Studio, and I will provide links in the notes. This is a 3-ply recycled cotton rope. I really like it because it's spun really tightly, which means it'll be very durable. And then I also have this cotton frizz ribbon that's also recycled. And it's really beautiful, and I think it's gonna hold up to animals playing with it really, really well. There's also a lot of options for single ply macrame string. which is really, really pretty. I don't think it's gonna hold up quite as well as these other ones, but if you would like to try that, that is up to you. In terms of quantity, I would suggest buying about 8 ounces of fiber for every square foot of mending that you're doing. So in this tutorial, we'll be learning how to use weaving to repair a damaged area of upholstery. This is a visible mend, meaning we're not trying to hide the fact that we're fixing the furniture. We are using the repair as a solution to fix the piece, but this is also a design choice. And so that means that when we're done, not only will the repaired areas be the strongest parts of upholstery, but they will also be the most interesting and the most beautiful. So I'm going to show you from start to finish how to make a woven repair to this corner of the chair. It's just kind of frayed, needs a little bit of help. We'll also look at some other areas of the chair that I've fixed, but we're gonna start here. And the first thing that we're gonna do is attach the warp to the upholstery. So the warp is the vertical threads that basically provide the skeleton, the structure for the weaving, and then we're gonna flesh it out with these yarns afterwards. We want to start by marking off where we're going to put the warp onto the upholstery. And for that, I like to use my little tape measure and a marker. So for this project, I'm gonna space the warp threads about 1/2 inch apart. That works well for these bulky fibers. If you have a finer yarn that you're gonna be weaving with, you might wanna go with warp threads a little bit closer together, but we're gonna do 1/2 inch. The most important thing for this is to note that we don't want to attach the warp threads in a section of upholstery that's already damaged. So we're gonna go well outside of the damaged area to attach our warp. I'm gonna start down here. I'm gonna start right at the corner. And just begin marking every 1/2 inch. Doesn't need to be super dark, just dark enough so that you can see it. And with the rest of this chair, I'm not just doing squares, I'm being a little bit more playful with my shape. So I'm not gonna go just in a straight line all the way across. I'm gonna come up a little bit. So I'll go directly up, and I'm just gonna follow the grain of the fabric. So if you have upholstery where you can see these straight lines, those provide a really good guide when you're placing these marks. So here's this, I'm gonna go straight up out here. And then I'll continue placing my marks. Go a little bit further here. Okay, I think that's good for this side. I think that'll cover the damaged area that I want to cover. So I'm going to come around this side now. So I will just line it up with where I have my dots. I have one right in the corner. You can't really see it, but it's there. Right there. I'm still following the grain of this fabric. So even though it's not level to the floor, it's going to be level with the upholstery, and I think that's going to look better overall. Now that I've marked where I'm attaching my warp, I'm ready to start sewing it in. I like to warp right to left because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you may want to go the other way. So I don't know if you can see this, but my last dot is right about here, and I'm going to come one dot over, and that's where I'm going to insert my needle. And that'll make sense in a little minute. Okay. So when I'm putting my needle through here, I'm being really careful to only catch the fabric and not the stuffing underneath. if you catch the stuffing, it can kind of pull the stuffing out through the holes, and it's just a lot harder to actually sew the warp in. So I'm coming straight off of the ball of warp. I'm not cutting a length. And the reason that I do that is just because I can continue to pull the warp through, and that means fewer knots, and that means fewer things to deal with when you're doing your finishing work. So that's how I prefer to do it. And as you go through this and learn the way you like to work, you can make your own decisions about that. But I'm going up to the top here now. Again, I am looking at this upholstery grain, making sure that I'm making a straight line. And I'm going to come right about here. And I normally would mark up here too. I'm going to freehand it just for today. But you might want to do that when you're doing this work to actually mark up the top too. Up over the corner. And then I'm going back down here. I'm going to go to where I first sewed in my warp. Right, that same spot. And then I'm going to come up through this next dot here. Something to keep in mind when you're doing this too. These markers that come with the kit, they disappear really fast. They shouldn't leave a lasting mark on your upholstery, but if you have a different one, you may want to sew your warp in just slightly below your marks or slightly outside your marks, because some of these markers are not totally erasable. And so if you want to make sure that you're not going to see any dots once you're all done, you might just want to make sure those dots are slightly inside your repair area. Come up here. Feels like I caught a little bit of stuffing there. There we go, that's better. I have a little knot in my warp here. And that'll happen sometimes. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to continue warping this until I'm all done, and then I'll show you how to adjust the tension. In my little corner of the internet, there's been a lot of movement around creating a circular economy with our wardrobes. So really trying not to throw anything away, choosing to purchase things mindfully rather than just cheaply, repurposing things, fixing them, passing them on. And I think that's amazing. And I think we also need to apply the same ideas to furniture. The furniture manufacturing industry has an enormous carbon footprint. I started learning more about furniture manufacturing when I was preparing for this project, and there's so much that goes into making sure we can buy something that's affordable. And the truth is, to make a sustainably produced piece of furniture, most of us are not able to afford that price range. So places like IKEA, etc., they go and harvest raw materials in one area. The people doing the harvesting probably aren't, or possibly aren't, working under the most safe conditions. There's probably environmental harm going on. Then those raw materials that have been harvested get shipped away. And think about the shipping and all the fuel that takes to another location where the raw materials are milled into usable, buildable materials. Then those pieces get shipped again to a factory where things are turned into furniture. Again, all along this process, there's environmental harm going on. There are toxic chemicals being dumped into the atmosphere, all kinds of unsafe labor practices, and after the things are turned into furniture, then they're shipped again to warehouses or stores where they're then sold to consumers, or maybe they're even shipped one more time. with all that, we're still throwing about 8 million tons of furniture in landfills every year. We're buying slightly more than we make, or we're buying slightly more than we throw away by like a few million tons, but we're buying more and more and more and more, right? So eventually, unless we learn to be more circular about the way we handle our furnishings, the same thing happens. Things get dumped in landfills, and all of those toxic chemicals, all of those raw materials, all of those things that in producing them, we harmed our planet, all those things are just getting thrown out. That's not okay with me. I'm gonna need a little bit more warp than this to get to the end of the section that I'm warping. So I could tie this off and start with a new piece of yarn. If I don't want to do that, what I can do is just pull some more yarn right off of that ball of warp. And then following the path of the warp, I'm just taking up all that slack. There we go. And so now I have a longer length of yarn to work with and hopefully can get to the end of the section. I have a corner up here that I'm weaving over. So that requires a little bit of creative warping. Instead of drawing dots where I want this to join, I'm actually going to be drawing a line. So when I'm warping up here, I'm still following the grain, coming up right there. And instead of going straight across here, I'm gonna go down this line. Still trying to be very careful not to catch that stuffing under there, which is really tricky in some spots. There we go. Oh, I did catch some stuffing. So that's what happens. I'm going to cut that off later, but that's why we want to avoid that. Go up and then down. So now these warps will be at a diagonal. Following that grain. And now we're following our line, our diagonal line. I bet I caught some stuffing again. Let's try that again. Go really close to the surface here. In some places, upholstery actually gets glued down, so that's a little bit trickier. But that's a little bit better that time. I'm working my way around the corner now, and I'll make sure to get a nice close-up shot of what this looks like on the top. We're just continuing to follow the grain of the fabric, spacing these about a 1/2 inch apart. Trying really hard not to grab the stuffing. Still happens a little bit. And now that I'm doing the other side of this top, I am actually just using the same spot where the warp is sewn in so that the warps actually meet here at the top. So here's a close-up of what the top of this looks like. You can see these warps coming up and meeting in these corners. And then once I get to the weaving part of this, I'll show you how that all comes together. Where I'm sewing in the warp, and I'm gonna go in here and then back to the last one. I'm out the same spot. All right. And now, I'm gonna tie it off right here. I'm just gonna do a little, just a simple knot around there. And now I'm gonna start adjusting my tension. So what we're looking for is a fairly tight tension. Like I said before, this kind of provides the structure for your mend, but you don't want it so tight that it's gonna pull on your upholstery. So what I'll do is just start taking up the slack. I'm basically following the path of the warp, but I'm going backwards. And just taking up a little slack with every warp thread. Until I get to the end. So it's fairly tight, but it doesn't pull on the upholstery. You don't need it as tight as you would if you were maybe weaving on a tapestry loom, because there's not going to be any extra warp at the top. We're going to weave right up to the top. So it's not bad if this isn't like super, super tight. And now that I'm here, I'll go ahead and cut this one and then just tie it off the same way that I did the other one. And we're all warped and ready to weave. I think one of the things that's the most harmful about this disposability culture, in addition to the environmental impact, is the impact that it has on our soul. And I think when we're caught in this cycle of produce, consume, replace, produce, consume, replace, we're being robbed of an opportunity to learn about ourselves. And the way I mean that is by taking an object and deciding to repair it, we have to use our creativity. We have to take what we have available to us and figure out a way to make it work. Also, in a disposability culture, when things move so fast and there's new trends all the time, and we're listening to influencers and advertisements and blogs and home decor magazines, etc., what we're doing is letting other people tell us what's beautiful instead of asking ourselves. And we are consuming the products of someone else's creativity rather than developing our own. So I think the more that we spend time deciding, what can I do with this thing that got damaged to make it beautiful again? What can I do to make it useful again? This is an opportunity for self-discovery, for self-belief, for creativity, and it just deepens our interaction with our environment and with ourselves. I'm ready to start weaving now. I have some rope threaded onto my long wooden weaving needle, and I always weave from bottom to top. So I'm gonna start here. I always start right to left too, because like I said, I'm right-handed. And I'm gonna weave all the way around this corner. So I'm going under, over, all the way around. Now, if you've woven before, you probably know this, but if not, you don't want your yarn to be pulled tight like this. You actually want it to go like that, kind of undulate in the warp. So the way I make sure to give enough slack for that is I usually just pull this up at a bit of an angle and then make a little bubble and then pack it down like this. You can see how the yarn just kind of goes over, under. And then when I'm coming back this direction, I'm looking at what this last pass of yarn did, and I'm going to do the opposite. So this one ended by going under this warp. So when I come back this way, I'm going to go over this warp. And I will just be following this pattern. Going up at an angle again. And then down. You can see that you have a couple of little tails of yarn to deal with. You can wait until the end and weave them in. But what I like to do is incorporate them as I'm weaving. So I kind of I'll make it part of this warp, right? So this one goes over it, this one goes under it, and then I'll do the same over here. So when I come back, I'm actually wrapping around that little tail. So that as I weave, it'll be up here alongside this warp as well. I said before that for me, weaving is a spiritual practice, and I said that for a lot of reasons. But I think the main one is just the symbolic element of what happens when we mindfully approach damage rather than just getting frustrated and discarding something. We look at it as, like I said, an opportunity to create beauty. I think that this chair, now that it's fit, is not going to fail to have an impact, right? Anytime somebody sees it, they're going to be like, huh, what's the story there? And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I really do find so much meaning in using this as a practice to express embracing imperfections, looking at problems as opportunities for growth, and also just the fact that the more open we are about our story, the more we give other people permission to be open about theirs and to maybe learn to process it and see it in a new way. I've done 4 back and forth passes of my weaving yarn, and so the next thing we need to do is make sure that we're actually attaching our mend to the upholstery. It's not going to be good if it's just floating on top. So what we'll do is take some warp thread on our upholstery needle. I'm going to start by just looping it. I'm going under the upholstery, making a little loop around this first warp thread. And then just tying a knot here. And now, instead of just weaving across, I'm actually going to go under every other warp thread, but I'm also going underneath the upholstery. Looks kind of funky right now, but we're going to cover that up. So I'm going over this warp thread, and I'm going under this one, under the upholstery too. Okay, I'm going to switch sides. And continue doing this all the way across. As always, being careful not to grab too much of the stuffing. There we go. Now we're at our last one. And what I'll do here, come underneath and then do it one more time to actually loop around this warp thread. And the great thing about this is not only does it secure it to the upholstery, but it also keeps the sides of your weaving right where you want it to be. So what can happen sometimes if you don't have the correct tension on your weaving yarn, this can start to draw in a little bit because you're weaving a little bit too tight. And you can somewhat correct that by just nudging your end warp thread over a little bit and then tacking it down like we just did. Now that I have my warp row in, I'm going to continue to weave just like normal. And I'm looking at this last row of my weaving yarn, not the warp. I'm looking at this last row of weaving yarn to get where I should go over and under, because that's what's going to make the pattern look consistent when it's finished. So I'm looping around. And you can see that once I get that row on top of the warp, you don't really see the warp much at all. So that's just an invisible way to secure your mend to your upholstery. And it strengthens the fabric and keeps it in place. Let's talk about what to do if you run out of yarn and you're not done with that color yet. So I want to keep going with this yellow. I'm going to grab a new length of it. And just because I don't like the edges of my mend to bulk up, I'm actually going to pull this out a couple stitches. And then with my new piece, I'm just going to continue just as I would if I hadn't run out. Okay. And now here's my little cheat. You can, if you want, carry these ends up the warp like we were doing with all of these other ends, but it can be pretty time consuming and a little bit confusing if you get too many of them going at once. So let's cut that right here and then just tuck that in behind. And then this one is going to do the exact same thing. A little tricky around the corner. Just tucking that behind our mend. And continue weaving as normal. I've gotten up to the level of this shape right here. And what I want to do is come in with a new color, and then I'll be joining them in the middle. So bring that to the center here, and then come in with my new color. Now, this is a little bit tricky. If you don't get it, that's okay, but it's just a little bit of a pro tip. When the yarns are coming towards each other in the same row, you want them to actually follow the same over-under pattern. So the way you find out how to start over here is just kind of counting off as if you were weaving all the way across with this one. So I would be going over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. So that means when I start with the new color, I will go under that last warp. The nice thing about that is when you finish those two colors, if you wanted to come across the top of both of them with another color, these would be in a consistent pattern, and so it'll just look a lot neater. So now that I have them both meeting here in the middle, what I'm gonna do is just cross them over each other. So this one, they're crossed like this. Then I'm going back this direction with the yellow. And back this direction with whatever this color is. Green, blue. So that's how we start to join these. And I'll do that a little bit more so you can see how it works. So you'll notice that every time I cross over, I'm being consistent. So the one that's coming from the left is going underneath the one that's coming from the right. And it doesn't really matter if left goes over right or right goes over left, as long as you're just consistent with it all the way up. So these are nice and woven in. I'm gonna cut them to get them out of my way. Makes it a little bit easier. Go. And because I'm interlocking these consistently, it's just gonna be a nice, neat line all the way up. So I've gone about another inch. I went a couple more rows than I meant to, but that's okay. And now it's time to do another warp row. So I'm actually gonna feel down in here and figure out, okay, which one did I attach to the upholstery on the last pass? So it was these ones that I attached before. So that means this time, first I'm gonna loop around this end warp like we did on the last one. So the last time I went across, these overs were on these warps. And so now on this pass, the overs are gonna be on the alternating ones. And that may not be hugely important. I think the important thing is just that your mend is firmly attached to your upholstery. But to me, it just makes me feel better. Just knowing that it's going to be attached here, 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 here. So I think that'll make it a little bit stronger in the long run. Mending is absolutely an art practice. I think a lot of us would say, oh, I'm not an artist. But we all have that capability. Maybe we've been repressing it. Maybe it's been squashed out of us at some point. But a creative practice is something that I think everyone should have. It's a space that we get to make where we set the rhythm. We get to step away from the rest of our lives that can feel rushed or out of control, or like our attention is being pulled in a million different directions. And in this creative space, we get to have conversations with ourselves that we wouldn't have otherwise. There we go. And when we'll save this so we don't have to knot this off every row. We can just carry it up the warp. So then once we do another 4 rows, we'll just use this same piece of string to go back over top. I've been continuing to weave, and I'm getting close to this corner right here. which means it's getting kind of tight as I'm weaving in here. And that's gonna happen when you get close to the top of your warp. So the way I'm working with that here is by, instead of putting my needle through down here, I'm doing it up here where I have a little bit more warp. I'm helping it along by lifting up every other warp thread with my finger. So it's a lot easier to just pull it through like this. Another thing, when you pull it through here, this can get caught on your warp thread. So just kind of wiggle it through like that. So I'll continue to weave now, and when we get to the point where the warps are meeting at the corner up here, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think the things that we learn about ourselves in a creative space are so important. We get to go to a different level of our consciousness that we don't get to access in regular everyday life as much. And I know that I've done some of my best processing at the loom or with a needlework or mending project in front of me. And I think it's because when your hands are busy, your mind is allowed to calm in a different way. It's just so valuable. And I've done a ton of therapy, okay? But I find my art practice is the most healing. And so the invitation here is really to just create a space where you can be open, where you can ask questions, where you can try things, where you can play. But most of all, you just give yourself permission to just be there, to be present for the process, to not focus on the product so much, and just honor your own rhythm. Just about to the point where I can't really squeeze any more rows into this spot right here. I'm gonna try to get one more in there. When you get to the point where it's really tight, what you have to do is shove those ones down a little further than you actually want them. You can sneak under that warp. Let's see if I can get one more going the other way. Yeah. Okay, that's the last one that's going to fit there. So, shoved it down pretty hard. So now I can push it back up, and you can see that you can even see that warp right there. Okay. Now for this, instead of going all the way around here, to make a nice neat corner, I'm going to cut a new length of this same yarn, and I'll be working two simultaneously, so they'll be going towards each other here. My fingers could do it. Now, if you're working with only the 2 needles in the kit, or if you have a limited number, there's a couple of things that you can do. Number 1, which is what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this section for now I'm going to just focus on this section and then come in and fill this in later, and I'll show you how to interlock this after the fact. Another thing you can do is just take a piece of duct tape or painter's tape or whatever and tape the end of your rope just like a shoelace. Might as well show you this now too. So instead of continuing to carry this other one up the warp like I normally do, with this tail, what I'm going to do is stick the needle through behind my mend, then thread the needle since this is such a short piece. Pull it through like that and just trim it. I'm coming in from here and we're going to meet in the middle. And we're just going to do an interlock like we've been doing with our other sections, except we're going on a diagonal. The pace of weaving, the pace of mending is slow. This is not a quick art form, and I think that that's beautiful because we learn to accept that things take as long as they take. And to really honor a process, we have to accept the rhythm that's necessary for that process to be completed well. I'm not doing my warp rows up here because when it's on a curve, just the fact that it's on a curve is enough to really keep this nice and tight against your upholstery, so you don't have to worry about that. Getting a little tight over here, starting to go this way towards the back instead of coming straight across up here, so I'm loosening this just a little bit. You just have to keep an eye on your tension up here, especially when you get close to the end, because it can kind of get away from you. And it's okay if that happens. You just go back and loosen these threads up. The beautiful thing about yarn is it's very forgiving, so you can always kind of squish it around, get it to sit where you want it. Throw a piece of duct tape on the end of this. And weave at the very end. Okay. So we're just about to the end here. Using my needle to lift up the warp enough so I can grab this one and pull it through. And actually, this is going to work out perfectly. So now I have this one. I've woven it as far as it can go. Just sticking that end under here. And now I'm going to weave one little row at the end here. pushing this down further than I want it to sit, just to give myself enough space to get the needle underneath the warp. Go under this last one. Over this one. Stick it down in here. Push those threads back into place and cut that one. And I'll do the same thing with this one that I did with that other tail. Leave the needle in a little bit, then thread it, pull it through, and trim the end. I will come in and finish weaving the pink section, and I'll be doing the interlocking after the fact instead of while I'm weaving two colors simultaneously. So all I have to do is just find the loop where I would have interlocked. Go from down up in that loop, and then continue weaving normally. I'll do that one more time to show you. This tail has been woven in far enough, so go ahead and cut that. Okay, and then I find my next loop right here. Up through the loop and back. I'm almost to the very, very top of my warp here. I'm only going to be able to interlock in one more loop right here before I have to be done. So once again, I've pushed the yarn down extra far. Gives me a little more exposed warp. To do these last stitches individually. It's just too tight to pull it through more than one. All right, there we go. Okay, I'm gonna reposition, nudge it back up the warp like that. This was from my warp row, and I don't need that anymore. Just cut that off. And then feed this baby back down through. And cut. So that's a complete repair on the corner here. And next I'll show you a few more of the trickier spots that I worked on in the other parts of the chair, just to give you an idea of the kind of things you might run into and how I handled them. Okay, I've been working on fixing this arm, and a few people asked me how to work with corners and arms of things. So for this one, I warped up and over the top of the arm, and if the upholstery here was intact, I would have also warped the front, but there's not really much to attach it to right here. So what I'm going to do is finish weaving all of this, and then I'm gonna warp the front but instead of attaching it to the upholstery, I'll be attaching it to the weave that I just did. And one other thing that you might want to do if you're warping over something like this is just, I tied a couple of knots with my warp yarn just to hold this in place. Otherwise it'll fall down and it's just kind of annoying. So I will work on that and show you how I attach it in just a sec. Ta-da! Okay, so finished this weaving here, so I'm ready to add the warp to the front. I've started by putting a couple of dots where I want my warp to go. And as usual, I'm going to start one warp over. Okay. Now, again, I'm following the grain, making sure that my warp is going to be vertical. So it looks like this one needs to go right here. And I'm going to go through 3 of these loops up top because that's about a 1/2 inch. Okay. Back down to this first spot where I started. In. Over one more. We'll go 1, 2, 3. Yep, that looks just about vertical. Now these ones may not be perfectly even. Kind of tricky when you're working with a tiny little space to have everything spaced perfectly, but we're just trying to get close. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and tie it off here. Start by tying this one off. I think my tension is okay. I don't think I need to adjust it much, but do a little bit. Go. Nudge it a tiny bit. There we go. Down. Like that. And tie it. So that's ready to weave. I'm going to weave from bottom to top. And when I get to the sides here, I'll interlock with these loops that are here. So I showed you how to do that before. And that is basically how that's going to work. When I get up top here, it's going to be the same thing where it's going to be kind of tight. So I'll just pack down this weaving a little extra tight so that I can squeeze some yarn up in there. And I think for me, it looks best. Ta-da! All done. The other arm turned out a little bit neater than this one did, but I just wanted to show you how that ended up. It looks pretty good. I wanted to show you this little spot. You might run into some areas that are curved, not a right angle. So for this one, you're just trying to keep your weaving pattern as consistent as possible to make it look like it's all part of one repair. So over here, I have my warps going vertical to match the rest of the arm. And then here what I did was just carry that same warp horizontally across. So you can see how up here, I just added a supplemental area, and it's coming off the top of the warp threads here and then just straight across this little diagonal. Another spot I wanted to show you is a place that was actually ripped. There was a big tear like all along here. So you can see here and here, there's stitches where I sewed the upholstery back together, and I did that before I warped it. And I especially was very careful to put in those warp rows, sewing the repair to the upholstery, just to make sure that it's extra sturdy, because there really isn't much fabric underneath this part to hold it together. I love how this little chair has turned out. I still have a little bit of work to do on it, but this whole process has just been so much fun. It has been a lot of work, but I've also learned so much, and I'm so excited that I was able to give this little guy a new life. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've had fun. I really can't wait to see what you do. If you want to share photos, videos of your process or your completed project, please do. I'm on Instagram at s.newbert. You can also use the hashtag #wovenmending, and we can share, see what we're doing as a community, and hopefully inspire other people to hop on this mending train, keep some furniture out of landfills, and help other people invite some more creativity into their lives. If there's anything that you have questions about that I didn't cover in the tutorial, you can find me at my website, sarahnewbert.com. There's a contact form there. I also have decided that I'm going to make this tutorial available on a donation basis. So anybody can access it, but if you like what you've learned and you appreciate what I've done here, you can donate at Venmo. My Venmo is at SNOOBERT, Snoobert. And I'm also at paypal.me/Snoobert. And I would really welcome any of your generosity. But most of all, continue to invest in your creativity. Continue to give yourself permission to play. Continue to ask questions. And as always, I love this community so much. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I wish you merry mending.